I fully believe on a energetic, spiritual, whatever you want to say level, that there is a purpose being served. And it might be beyond our understanding. Like, for whatever reason, people like us, maybe we didn't drink enough fluoride, maybe we didn't watch enough TV, I don't know. But for whatever reason, we're here, we are playing the role that we're playing to bring these conversations, to bring this stuff to light. And at the same time, they are playing the role that they're playing. And, without them playing the role they're playing, we wouldn't be waking up. The last 2 years have been a great opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to finally focus on like what I want and just put my energy into that. And I think that if you're taking that approach, this has been a really beautiful time for, new relationships, new partnerships, new friendships, new understanding of what freedom means to us.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Derrick Broze. I first heard about Derrick when I came across the Conscious Resistance podcast a few years ago, and I actually didn't connect the dots for a while that Derrick Broze was actually the host of that podcast. And it wasn't until I came to Mexico that I realized that Derrick was a very prominent figure in the freedom community. So many of you will know him already. He writes for a number of alternative news websites, he puts out videos, he makes documentaries. He really is making a lot of very important contributions. And what I love the most about Derrick is that he's not looking backwards, he's definitely always looking forwards. And everything that he's doing with the Conscious Resistance and with Freedom Cells, it's all about how we're going to build the future and not just how we're going to fight against the existing paradigm. I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please give it a like, and please especially give it a share on social media. The account is being heavily throttled now, so anything you can do to get the word out there would be hugely appreciated. And if you're enjoying the podcast so far, please give it a 5-star review in whichever podcast app you're using, and make sure you subscribe for future episodes. As always, if you'd like to give a donation, there are 2 ways for doing this. The first is by giving a Bitcoin tip, which you can do by clicking that icon on the Twitter page or checking the show notes for the Bitcoin address, and it's possible to do that both on-chain and via Lightning. And the second way is to follow the link in the show notes to buy me a coffee, where you can give a non-Bitcoin donation as well. Tips are hugely appreciated and will go directly towards paying the costs involved with running the show. All right, on to the episode. Derrick, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to be able to speak to you. I've been doing a bit of a deep dive into all things about Derrick Broze recently. So loads of stuff to ask, but welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. Thanks for the opportunity to connect with you, learn more about you, and to speak with your audience.
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, I've heard a lot about you. I'm in Mexico as well. And shout out to Andrew Howard, who I'm pretty sure that he was the one who managed to kind of connect us in the end, right?
Yeah. Andy reached out to me and mentioned, that I needed to talk to you.
Nice. Yeah, there was actually a couple of people here who said, you gotta find out about Derrick Broze and have a chat to this guy, because people know about you out here in Mexico, which is definitely something we'll get into, I'm sure. But before we get into all of that, I'm just wondering if you can give us a little bit of a background as to yourself, because I know that kind of before you got into this whole alternative media space and doing journalism and stuff, you had a bit of a kind of like rocky time. So I'm hoping you might be able to just kind of give my audience a little bit of a background about that.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Derrick Broze. I am 37 years old. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. As you said, I live in Mexico now. I've been living here for the last 2 years. And I've been doing independent media journalism for about a decade now, and kind of dedicating my life to activism in various forms for the last 12 years, you could say, since about 2009, 2010. That's been, this journey that I've been on, doing public speaking, writing books, doing articles, documentaries, things of that sort. But as you mentioned, prior to that, in my previous life, it almost feels like in my late teens, early 20s, I really kind of got sucked into just like the world of drugs and alcohol abuse and all kinds of things. And that had been preceded by kind of just growing up as a super depressed little kid, a young kid, and just not really knowing how to navigate a lot of the emotions I was dealing with, and situations happened in my home life, particularly my father and different members of my family being involved in drugs and going to prison and things like that, and just really being influenced by that. So I kind of went into depression at a young age, and eventually had some bouts with depression and some suicide attempts. And by the time I graduated from high school, I went right into college and I just started drinking a lot, and that drinking turned into taking pills, and taking pills turned into using crystal meth. And then that turned into getting locked up. And I got arrested November 2005, about a week or so before I turned 21. And that was kind of the beginning of my life shifting in a lot of ways. I mean, it had already started to happen prior to that. Like I already knew I was going down a path I didn't want to be on. And I actually got myself sober before I got arrested. I just was still kind of in the world of drug dealing and making money that way. I'd kind of got into that for a little while. So I was able to get my mind and my body out of all the insanity and get, sober and whatnot. But I was still just kind of in the mindset of like hustling, making money that way. And it's interesting because now in the world that I live now with my political beliefs and philosophical beliefs, I don't think that I was doing anything wrong. I don't think I was causing anybody harm. I mean, I wasn't in a good position. I was definitely like not doing well mentally, and I was using drugs as a way to self-medicate. But ultimately, I don't think throwing me in a cage and putting me in prison was the most ideal situation, or is even an ideal way to try to help people at all. Ultimately, I had to make it my own personal choice when I was in that position to say, all right, I'm going to do something about this. I don't want to just be like my father and my, uncle, other people in my life that I saw getting locked up, going to prison, and just kind of cycling in and out of that system. And so I had to really start digging deep. And that's when I started to do a lot of like the individual healing, do some journaling. I discovered meditation, got into Buddhism for a while I was locked up, and started kind of on my healing journey. And, so I did that 2005, 2008, ended up doing 18, 19 months before I got out. And so by the time I was getting out, late 2008, going into 2009, June 2009, I got off parole. I was like finally done with this prison system after going back and forth with it for about, the 2 or 3 year period. And it was in that space where I was like, now I'm a felon. I've got this whole experience of like, I can't get a job here, can't get rented here. Some people judge you. That's when my mind was like, I was already kind of opening up spiritually from things that were happening to me in prison and things I was going through. But then coming out, I never really trusted government or anything like that. So it sort of evolved to me starting to question like the world at large around me and, everything else I'm doing now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested to know whether you think that experience that you had, like whether you would be who you are now and doing the things you're doing now if you hadn't have had that experience. Because I guess, with a lot of the time, people who are kind of in the, quote unquote, awake community, often they've gone through some kind of trauma, and that was in some way required or necessary, or a kind of prerequisite to kind of bring them to where they are. So do you feel like that was the case for you? Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think that, as you said, that I've seen over the last 12 years of being involved in these various communities that like a lot of people do have traumatic events. Sometimes somebody will get sick, they'll get cancer, and it'll cause them to question their whole life, or somebody in their family will die, or they'll go to prison, right? Or something really kind of strong, life shifting can happen. And, I don't really know if I believe in fate. So maybe, if I did believe in fate, I would say, well, it's going to happen that way one way or the other. I'm fated to do what I'm doing now. But I don't know. I do know that it seemed to impart a lot of wisdom and really, really empowering experiences through it. As much as I hate that institution and the prison and the time that, I went through it, honestly, it shaped me into who I am at the moment. And I really think that in a lot of ways, getting locked up and, whenever I share this story, I usually ask people like, have you ever really experienced a situation where you're truly powerless, like, 100% powerless, where, I don't think you're ever really powerless, but what I mean by that is like in the sense of you're in this box, in this cage, these four walls, and nobody can get you out of there. Girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, mom, dad, pastor, priest, lawyer, nobody can get you out, right? You can call them you want, you can cry, you can rack up the phone bills. It's not going to make a difference. You're there and you're looking at the calendar and you're like, wow, the earliest I'm going home is like next year, and that's a pretty defeating feeling, or it can be. It can definitely is like a feeling of powerlessness. And so you see in prison, you see people gravitate towards, well, there's a lot of things. Like the most, I think, primal kind of base ways of thinking, namely like racism and stuff. Like you look like me, we're the same skin color, so we all hang out, right? Like I'm native and Mexican, and part of my family is Czech as well, so I'm kind of a mutt. So when I was in there, it was like, hey, this group of people's telling me I need to hang out with them, and I can't talk to this other group of people. It just this whole other like it's real low level way of thinking, but it's because there's so much fear there, right? Fear that is masked as machismo and like toughness and like we're gonna fight and all this stuff, but really it comes down to a lot of people just dealing with fear. So it's just like a whole nother ecosystem, and you see people dealing with this in different ways. You could choose to go in there and blame everybody for it's their fault that you're locked up. It's like it's the cop's fault, or it's your girlfriend's fault if she didn't do this thing, it's your parents' fault. And sometimes maybe it really is the fault of somebody else that you're in the situation, but ultimately, and this is where I think a lot of my discovery of Buddhism, I started to read the Dhammapada, the Buddhist Bible. I get chapters sent to me like on a daily basis because I discovered it. One of the weekends, it was in the newspaper. They had like a religious section that quotes from the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, different traditions, and they had a quote from the Dhammapada, from the Buddha, and it was something, I can't remember which one it was, but it was just like, wow, it hit me really deeply. So I started getting sent chapters of it, started kind of developing my own meditation practice, started journaling every day and thinking about like, how the heck did I get here? I'm locked up in the same thing my father did, for the things I was angry at him for. Just had to do that whole thing. And so I don't know that without that, I would end up doing what I'm doing now. I did mention earlier I was able to get myself sober, but I was still kind of running those same circles. And even when I first got arrested, to be honest, like if I was trying to get out as quick as possible. So when I got locked up, I knew I was like, I just got caught with crystal meth and some scales and some bags and some things. I'm probably, I never been in major trouble, but I figured I was probably screwed. And I got in and they offered me probation. And I was like, oh my God, probation? Like, heck yeah, I'm signing this. I'm going to get out by the weekend. Because I didn't want my family to know. I didn't want anybody to know. I figured I could just get in and take care of it and nobody would even know the difference. And I did get screwed. They lied to me. They told me that I was going to sign for probation. They had me sign on a Friday. I went back and they said they were going to see the judge on Monday and release me. When I went back to the cell, everybody I was talking to was telling me, man, that doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound like a deal we've ever heard of. And it just something, I got that gut feeling. I was like, okay, I think I'm going home Monday, but something doesn't feel right. And sure enough, I went back and saw the judge, and the judge was like, we're going to give you 2 years felony probation, but we're also going to give you a concurrent jail sentence. So I was on probation, but also sent to prison. So it was this really weird thing. But in the end, I guess it did have to happen because, like I said, up to that point, I was still thinking like, okay, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to get out. I know I can go hustle. I was already starting to like scheme again on how I could make more money and the way I knew how to make money at that time was selling drugs. And so I was still in that mindset. In fact, usually what happens if you're not ready to change, you go in and you meet new people, and those people know how to do identity theft, or they know how to do this hustle, or they know how to do this drug connection or this thing. And then you get into a whole nother world that you've never been involved in. So yeah, I mean, I needed, as much as I hate to say it, like, and I don't ever credit prison, the institution, for saving me or putting me on the path I am now. It was my own personal choice. Not everybody makes that choice. My father cycled in and out of institutions his whole life and never made the choice to stop going there. But it was that time that allowed me to just kind of reflect on what the heck was going on with my life. And I really was in a dark place, and I felt like I needed this break, like even to the point that 2 weeks before I got locked up, my mother had found me like in the room I was staying with at her house when I was coming off drugs and getting sober, just like in the closet on my knees crying. And she's like, son, what's going on with you? How can I help you? And I just remember telling her, I need a pause. Like everything is going too fast. And then 2 weeks later, I got arrested. So be careful what you wish for.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Crazy story. So in that time when you were kind of, you said that you were kind of getting into Buddhism and stuff like that and meditation, how did you go from there to kind of getting involved in alternative media and journalism and that kind of thing? Like where do those two things connect?
So I think I kind of mentioned I've always been curious and skeptical of government and things of this sort. Even well before I ever really knew what the word anarchism was, or libertarianism, or voluntarism, or any of these kind of terms that would become important to me later on. I remember being in like elementary and checking out books about UFOs or the Bermuda Triangle, or, things that are just like, I was skeptical. I was curious. I was like, why are there these supposed mysteries out there that I'm not being told about, or that people think are crazy and they could be real? It was just, It got me really curious. I remember at a young age about all kinds of paranormal type things, and things that maybe some of them I don't necessarily believe or really think there's strong evidence these days, but it was really like that curiosity that was already in me. And then in junior high, I'm listening to like Rage Against the Machine and a lot of bands that are like, obviously anti-authority. And I got into punk. I still do love punk, but I grew up, as a punk and metalhead. So there's a lot of anti-authority stuff in those songs and those lyrics, but it wasn't anything that I ever really had any strong philosophy with. It was just like, yeah, fuck the government kind of thing, like, generally speaking, right? It wasn't like, here's my deep philosophy behind why I feel that way.
Yeah.
So it was kind of more like teen angst. And so I feel like that was kind of always in me. But at some point when I got depressed and got into drugs, like I just forgot about all that stuff. And then when I got out of prison and I got off parole, as I mentioned, I was a felon now. And I remember I was just going to the library all the time, checking out. Well, I was trying to apply for jobs. So I was using the computer. I didn't have my own laptop at the time. I just got out. I was going to the library to look up for jobs that would hire a recently released felon. And, sometimes that's pretty difficult and so I ended up doing that quite a bit, trying to find jobs for a while. And while I was at the library, I decided like, hey, I'm going to read one of these books. And it sounds kind of silly, but I mean, through that process of when I got addicted, got locked up, and then started going through this, awakening kind of transformation, I felt like this cloud was lifting, like this cloud of not only the depression and the drugs and all that stuff, but like this cloud of like, I'd forgotten who I was, and as that kind of was lifting away and I was able to feel good and probably the first time in my life, and just excited about the future and just curious again. It's like I rediscovered this piece of me that was always there, this desire to learn and to understand the world. And so with that newfound excitement, I ended up checking out this book called Cannabis: A History, which is just a really cool book. It's all about cannabis, but not just like, here's a bunch of drug stories. It's more like the sociological impact, the legal impact, the historical impact, and just, it just does a great job. But it really was the first book that opened my eyes to just how much, like starting with the drug war, how I was lied to with things I was taught in high school or college and things like that, for example, especially because I was getting out of prison as part of the drug war, having just gone to prison for a victimless, nonviolent crime, but an illegal drug. And I learned, the origins of cannabis being made illegal, the role that the hemp industry played in that, the role that the oil industry played in driving out hemp, the role that like racism against Black jazz musicians and Chinese, immigrant workers played, all these different things. And that was really the curiosity that kind of opened in me. And then from there, it was like, this is 2009. Like I went to a Barnes and Noble. There happened to be an Alex Jones documentary. I watched that. I happened to be reading Ron Paul's book, Revolution Manifesto. I was listening to a metal band that was literally writing like these heavy songs about the Federal Reserve. And then like a week later, Ron Paul spoke at the University of Houston. Like all that happened within a week or two. And it was just like, and that was kind of the beginning of a lot of my journey. And I started to get involved with, just local activism. I started an activist group called the Houston Freethinkers, which was active for about 8 years or so. And, just did all kinds of different things, documentary screenings. I was a promoter, so I was always promoting music. And I started doing benefit shows, bringing together artists and musicians against the war or for this cause or feed the homeless or just different things. So we were doing like community garden stuff. We were doing documentary screenings, protests, marches, rallies, skill shares, anything you could think of just over that time. And, along the way as well, I started to see that the local media, they were lying about us. Like the first time one of our members dealt with a cop, they totally lied. When I got arrested, they spun the story around. The cops pulled a shotgun on us, and then they said we were the ones that were aggressing on the cops. And it was little things like that started getting me wanting to I think I could probably do this better than they are. So I didn't go to school for journalism. I didn't, I just kind of trained myself just by curiosity, but also since then just taking journalism courses from the mainstream because I want to kind of take the best pieces of those things and leave the rest. But most of it has just been like me learning my desire to investigate, to understand the world around me, starting in Houston and then kind of expanding to doing bigger national stories, traveling to Standing Rock, traveling to Ferguson in 2014, going to Detroit, going to other places to cover important events and stories and things that I, keeping up with. And and that's kind of, but it really did start with like coming out of that transformation after prison, opening up my mind again and wanting to learn. And it's just been since then, like probably it took a couple of years in when I started to realize, okay, this might be something serious if I start to take it serious. At first, it was just like, cool, I'm getting paid a little bit extra money on the side to, write about things I care about. And then I started to realize like, okay, I want to take this more seriously. I want to actually have some standards and make sure that if I put my name on something, an article, a documentary, a book, etc., that people can trust it and that I know that I stand by the work that I'm doing.
Nice, yeah. And you are doing some awesome work. I've just finished watching the documentary that you did about the Finders, which is really, really well made and really well researched. And you've obviously got a gift for doing this kind of stuff. So that's great that you ended up kind of coming back around to it after having all of this time out in prison. And I think that a lot of people have had that. I mean, obviously, it's not just necessarily like prison or something like that. Like sometimes you have these gaps in your life because a lot of what you just said there like resonates with me as well. When I was younger, I mean, for me, it was kind of 9/11 was like a really big moment in my life. And I started going down this path of thinking the world is not as it seems. Like it was a huge kind of watershed moment for me that I was like, something is not right. And, I was the same. I got into watching, Alex Jones documentaries and all that kind of stuff. And I went down that, I guess like libertarian / skeptic route. Of getting into kind of like conspiracies and stuff, and I moved away from it, and I don't know exactly why that was. I guess it was just the gravitational pull of so many people in my life just not being involved with that. It was almost just like by process of osmosis, I went from kind of being into these ideas, just being like, oh well, no one else in society is interested, none of my friends or my family or whatever is interested in this stuff, and they think I'm, a bit of a kook. Maybe they've not necessarily said that or whatever, but that's how I felt, right? And then eventually, I've kind of more recently, like COVID was the thing that then I guess has kind of brought me a bit more back into that world and making me feel like I want to contribute to this alternative movement that's brewing. But I feel in a similar way. It's like that whole time in between that, there's nothing kind of necessarily wrong with it, but I definitely feel more in tune, having come back around to focusing my time and energy on pursuing truth in some way. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome, man. And it's, I think that what you just described there is probably one of the reasons that many people don't stick around too long or choose not to at least publicly question things too boldly, because it's a very isolating experience. Over the last 12 years now that I've been doing this particular, line of work, whatever you want to call it, I've met so many people, especially from doing live speaking events, tours across the US and Mexico. And so many people everywhere say like, oh, I thought I was so alone before I, joined this group or before I met these people. And they say that their husband thinks they're crazy, their wife thinks they're crazy, their kids think they're crazy, their parents think they're crazy. It's like whatever age or background they're coming from, they're being judged, they're being kind of attacked and maligned by people in their family. And, it can be a very isolating thing. So I can totally understand how you maybe have these curiosities or these thoughts or concerns. But if you're looking around and you're feeling like, well, dang, if I take these positions or even go down these roads, it's going to be pretty lonely. And, it's not necessarily something that and anybody really wants to voluntarily do, go isolate themselves in pursuit of truth. But sometimes, I think that many of us do also on the other side of things, discover that we meet people who we feel we can actually be ourselves with and be more genuine and be more honest and be more real with people. And we, in many cases, kind of make new family connections,
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, I've said this a few times before, that it's almost like, I think with some of these big world events and things that affect you deeply, or, even things that you just think there's something like not quite right here, you kind of have the opportunity to either just turn a blind eye to it, or to kind of go into it deeper and to say, okay, I'm going to go into this thing that feels uncomfortable for me. And I think that when you really go into it and you get past that initial discomfort, it can really like enhance your life. You can actually have, some of your most fulfilling moments through going into that discomfort and saying, I'm not going to just take the easy path, right? I know that this has been the case for a lot of people, for instance, like with the vaccine. And, like I know for me personally, for a lot of other people I've spoken to, like not getting the vaccine, taking that stance and saying, the whole of society is kind of weaponized in service of me getting this vaccine, and I'm going to decide not to get it. And that actually, it comes at huge personal cost quite often, and I'm not having to go at anyone who decides to take it for their own reasons, but for those who don't want to take it, you kind of had these two choices. Do I do the easy thing and not necessarily have a deeper, more meaningful life experience through this, or do I do the hard thing and I have that experience, but I have a harder day-to-day life? There's more friction in my life, right? And I think that was a big litmus test kind of for that experience to for most people. Like, what decision you made when it came to that was a big deal. And that's just one big example. Obviously there's many other examples, but I think that's a big one that a lot of people have found recently.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's I've seen this in so many different communities, not even necessarily just like this particular subculture, alternative media, freedom community, truth community, crypto. Like, there's a lot of overlap these days between some of these various communities. But even outside of that, I mean, just like, for example, one example, the permaculture community, the intentional community, all of these various subgroups and subcultures saw this dividing line because of the shots. People who, like, for example, there are people who are living in intentional communities. They've been living together for 20, 30 years. And then all of a sudden this COVID thing happens, the vaccine rollout happens. And then there are people who are on this side who say, like, yes, we all need to do this. We need to mask up. And there's other people who are like, I'm never going to put that thing in my body. Right. I mean, it really has. And even relationships. I mean, I spoke with people who had to get divorced because they came down on different sides of the conversation. So it really is, I think, the human cost of some of these kinds of events that we're seeing unfold in our world.
Yeah. I'm increasingly feeling with all of these things that, I guess at the beginning, there was a part of me that was kind of regretful, or not necessarily outwardly, but even just internally kind of regretful of the way the world was going and kind of wishing it was a different way. And now I've really kind of moved a lot past that. I don't have any kind of regrets for the things that have happened. I just think, okay, well, I'm kind of glad that we've had this peek behind the curtain, and it's given, people the opportunity to kind of shine and to have some, deeper life experience if they kind of, choose the right response to it, I guess.
Do you feel optimistic?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that things are still going to get worse before they get better. I think that the idea that things are on the mend now is a temporary state. I think that things are going to get still a lot worse, and we're going to have more trials. But yeah, I do. I actually think that, I just think that the level of connection or kind of spiritual, whatever it is, like, I don't necessarily want to say awakening because it sounds maybe a little too over the top, but just it seems that there is something that happens when you choose to reject the orthodoxy of what's going at the moment that does bring you closer to alignment with your source. And I think that seems to be what's happening. And I can't deny it. When I see that effect taking place, I struggle to kind of deny it and go, oh, okay, well, that's going to just fizzle out. I think that when something does feel kind of transformational on a spiritual level, I tend to think that that's going to happen for a good purpose, even if I think there'll be casualties along the way. I think things will get bad, but for those who are able to see it out through the end, I think that there will be rewards, both on the individual level and on a global level for that. How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty similar in my assessment, especially as far as what you said with the idea that things are going to get rougher before they get better, but that there will be a better at some point, when or what that looks like. I don't think any of us really know at the moment. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I've really told so many people that the last 2 years, starting in March 2020, which is when I moved to Mexico, my partner and I, we already knew we wanted to move to Mexico. We've been visiting for the last 7 years, and she has family out here. And we had a plan like, okay, a couple of years from now, we'll make this move, etc. And then whenever COVID started happening and toilet paper started disappearing and the government started talking about restricting interstate travel and checking license plates leaving Rhode Island and New York City, that was just like, okay, these are red flags for me. Let's go to Mexico. Let's watch this from a distance. And, at first it's like a reaction, out of not necessarily fear, but just out of awareness of like, oh my God, things are, getting crazy. I need to be prepared. And that's just the way I sort of approach this. And I think a lot of people are doing that. So many people are coming to Mexico, coming to different countries, moving from one state to another because of different things. People are making their moves. But ultimately, I think that it was actually a pretty positive thing, or at least maybe in the long term we'll be able to see that, because it seems like for many of us, myself included, it was sort of a kick in the ass to say, like, get your shit together. Like, if you have plans, you have goals, like, this is the time to focus on them, to key in on, like, what do you want, in terms of what we're facing. What do you want your 2030 to look like, right? Like, what do you want this next decade to look like for you? And especially then you roll around to June 2020 and ideas like the Great Reset are announced, and people been learning a lot more about that the last couple of years, that I think it just became this great impetus. And again, whether or not you're concerned more about getting sick from something like COVID-19 or from government lockdowns and authoritarian measures, it seemed like the last 2 years have been a great opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to finally focus on like what I want and just put my energy into that. And I think that if you're taking that approach, this has been a really beautiful time for new relationships, new partnerships, new friendships, new understanding of what freedom means to us. What do we want for our own lives, right? I think too many people were way too comfortable before COVID started happening, before the government started doing all the things that they've been doing. And in reality, maybe this was sort of another awakening or wake up for even the people who think they're so conscious and awake, to really say, okay, am I really ready to move into this new paradigm? Like, am I able to take care of myself and my family, my friends? Am I able to get good, clean water and food? Just having this whole conversation, rethinking, like, what does freedom mean to us? What do we want the future to look like? And, it's a really strange, beautiful trip we're on right now.
Yeah, definitely. That's a nice segue, actually, because you mentioned the Great Reset in 2030 and stuff, and you've got this campaign, the Greater Reset. I'm wondering if you just kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, the Greater Reset it's meant to be. So, as I mentioned, June 2020, the World Economic Forum, they announced the Great Reset. They put out this video saying that COVID-19 has shown that it's time for a reset of capitalism and resetting, remaking, redesigning all the different world's the world systems, food, education, technology, communication, hospital, healthcare, et cetera, just redesigning everything. And many of us started paying attention to. Some of us were already paying attention to the World Economic Forum, but a lot more of us started paying attention after that and wondering, what do they mean by this Great Reset? What is this whole thing, the Fourth Industrial Revolution? And what is that all about? And, essentially when you get into it, the people at the World Economic Forum, particularly Klaus Schwab, the executive director, the founder, they promote themselves as if they are the would-be sort of central planners, technocrats is a more specific term, that want to manage society. It's just the same old thing, top-down management of society, thinking that they know best what's for the future, but it's sort of doing this in terms of bringing in new technology and emerging technologies which, as neutral tools, have the potential for both good and bad. Things that can be really great for humanity and things that can also mean the end of privacy, the end of individual liberty, bodily autonomy, things like this. And so their vision is one that I don't think most people hearing this would probably want, or even if they like some of the ideas, they probably would want to have a choice and want them to be done voluntarily. But instead, the World Economic Forum and their partners in the United Nations and other organizations, they consider this to be public-private partnerships, government and nonprofits and NGOs and corporations working together to bring in the world that they want. Definitely not a definitely more of a top-down than a sort of people-driven grassroots change. So, that starts being announced in June. I did a couple investigations. I did a little mini documentary on that summer as I was diving deeper into this. And by the fall, I was looking ahead, and January 2021 was going to be the World Economic Forum's next meeting, their first post-COVID meeting, where they were going to officially unveil their plan for the Great Reset. And I'm watching this date, and I'm talking with some friends, and my work I always try to take a solutions-focused approach. So whether that's my journalism, whether that's documentaries, books, whatever, it's like I want to try to give people tools they can actually use in their lives. So I started thinking in those terms, like, okay, so what can we do? Like, if we don't do anything, if there's no way to actually focus on solutions, I know what's going to happen because I've seen it before with other organizations, other groups. The World Economic Forum is going to meet in January 2021 for 5 days. All the different researchers, independent media, conspiracy theorists are going to obsess about it for 5 days. Did you see what they said? Did you hear this thing? Did you see who's there? And focus on that, put all our energy into that. And then that's it. and then, it'll end and we'll go about our lives and they'll continue to do their thing. And it didn't seem like that was going to be enough. Like, it's like, dude, we're moving into a whole new stage here. These people are moving pretty quickly. Their plans seem to have accelerated. And so that kind of started some conversations about what would it look like to directly counter them by hosting a similar event. The World Economic Forum typically meets for 4, 5, 6 days, sometimes a week, and discuss things like technology, health, governance, all kinds of different ideas. And they get the so-called experts from government and corporations and all these people to come together, and they have their whole schmooze fest. So we thought, like, what would happen if we got, excuse the noise here, what would it look like if we got if we had 5 days of the brightest minds from independent media, from health, from community building, permaculture, decentralized technology, privacy tech, like all these different areas. And so that evolved to become what we call the Greater Reset. The website's thegreaterreset.org, and we first launched it in that beginning of January 2021. We had our event the exact same time the World Economic Forum was meeting. We've subsequently had 3 different events. Our 4th one will be coming up in January. And it's a live event. People can come either live in Mexico or live in Texas. And it's also online on our website, streamed for free. And it's 5 days of solutions. This is the most important part, is like, it's not a debate about crypto or viruses or Trump or the news or, those sorts of things. Like, have those conversations if you want. But all the speakers, all the presenters, with our different themes, we have a theme around food and permaculture, health, which is mental, spiritual, physical health, community building. So people who've built communities, people talking about community governance, decision-making, all kinds of ideas like that. Decentralized tech, taking back our tech, so all kinds of decentralized technologies in various ways. And then we also have counter economics. So talking about different ways to get off the mainstream financial system, whether that's crypto, alternative currencies, et cetera. So it's 5 days of people presenting solutions. And these are just brilliant speakers from around the world. And now we were in the last event, we had 27 countries tuning in. At the in-person event in Mexico, we had 400 something people show up. I think we had 12 to 15 different countries represented in person. So it's been an amazing way. And I think really what's most important is it's giving people a true sense of hope, not false hope, not hopium, believe in me, vote for me, I'll fix it kind of thing, but a real sense of like, hey, there are things we can do in our lives despite all this insanity going on in the world. And it's been really beautiful to see, as I was kind of mentioning earlier, to see like the crypto crowd, the spiritual crowd, the conscious community, the psychedelic kids, the conspiracy theory, this overlap of all these different people. And the one thing that really seems to be uniting people, if there's one single thing we could put it on, I would say would be bodily autonomy, self-ownership, those kinds of ideas. There's a lot of areas where people don't agree. Some people love crypto. Some people think crypto is a scam, right? I mean, there's a lot of disagreements within the broader community, but there's a lot of common ground around those basic principles. And so it's been really beautiful to see it kind of merging. And our event has been just one expression of that I think so many people are tired of just hearing about the problems, that they really want to like hear some ideas of what they can actually do for themselves and their family.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, like you say, there's so much overlap here between different communities. And, going back to what you asked me before of like, am I kind of optimistic? Like this is one of the things that does make me optimistic is just as you say, there are all of these different groups coming together. You've kind of got like, people who are kind of extreme, like on the anarchist side, you've got like Trump supporters, you've got people who are kind of like on the holistic health side of things. Sometimes you've even got people on the like super far left, advocating for some of these same things, which is, as you say, having more kind of individual autonomy, having more just less kind of general interference in our lives, and the ability to kind of form communities. I guess that's one of the key things is like forming more localized communities, which is kind of bipartisan. It's not really an issue that's just reduced to one group. So I just want to go into your philosophy a little bit, because do you describe yourself as like an anarchist or a voluntarist, or like, how would you kind of describe your, I guess, not necessarily political philosophy, but more your kind of life philosophy, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the years of, once you start putting in a lot of work, there's a lot of different things out there with your name on it, right? And so there's probably been times where I've referred to myself as an anarchist. There's probably been times specifically, referring to myself as a voluntarist. If pushed to label myself, I would probably say agorist. Market anarchist is kind of more specific. But as far as like even broader than that, because I think that is a crucial part of who I am, my reasons for believing in market anarchism or agorism, these kind of concepts are related to my belief in like moral principles and values, like the non-aggression principle, and thinking that because of that, government isn't a moral tool, so it's all sort of interrelated. But generally speaking, like over the years, I've called my belief system, for lack of a better term, essentially the conscious resistance, which is my main website. And then more recently in the last couple of years, what I've referred to as holistic activism or holistic anarchism. And, generally speaking, when I talk about the conscious resistance, it was this understanding. I don't think I mentioned this, but this will kind of help explain it. Like when I first got out of prison and I was in that stage that I was describing earlier of like really just excited about life and learning, I was diving deep into, the political philosophy. I was going to like anarchist bookstores and, going to the End the Fed local meetups, just anything I could get in my hands in. I was just trying to meet people and just learn. And I was super pumped up and excited. I was going to like, anonymous. I remember the first protest I went to, it was like an anonymous protest. This is like 2008 against the Church of Scientology in Houston. I had no idea what it was. I just like, people are wearing Tom Cruise masks and I'm just like, cool, I'm going to come hang out. But, I was starting to really just like, I need to know like, what are the movements out there? What are the people talking about? What's going on? And I was also diving deep into my spirituality. I was hosting meditations. I was meeting other spiritually minded people in Houston. And so for the first couple of years of my activism, 2010 to basically 2013, late 2012, I had this double life that I was living. And I had my activist friends. We would go to the protests and the marches and the rallies and do those things. And I had my spiritual friends. We would do the meditations, the consciousness circles, whatever, we're doing our ecstatic dances, all that good stuff. But these were kind of two different worlds, because when I would talk to my activist friends, and this is again 2010, 2011, a lot of the people I was meeting at the time were predominantly atheists for one reason or another. Like they consider themselves to be very logical, rational. They were sort of either libertarians or anarchists or, what have you. And they're just like, yeah, like logical, rational thinking. That's all there is. And so I wasn't getting much response when I was like, hey guys, you want to go to a meditation? To my activist friends, they were just like, what the heck are you talking about, hippie? And, I just kind of kept that away from them. I was like, all right, I'll just do activist things with those people. And then I would go to my meditation circles, my spiritual friends, and maybe I'd say, hey guys, you want to come to this protest? There was a police shooting another shooting this week. You want to come help me protest? Or we're going to protest the Federal Reserve because they're rigging the, economic system, or whatever issue I was about. And people would plug their ears, put their head in the sand and say, don't talk about it. You're going to manifest it. Don't bring the bad vibes. And it was just the spiritual crowd that I was meeting was very much like, don't, just let's just pretend everything's okay. And so, yeah, I had this kind of double life for a couple of years, but eventually it became clear to me that I couldn't really do that. And that to me, these are the same. I believe what we are facing is a spiritual war as much as it is a physical one. I mean, you can't really have one without the other. There's some people who very much get the spiritual side of things, but then they're all the way up in the air. They have no grounding, no footing on the foundation, that the physical reality does exist. You do have a body, and then there are other people who are so disinterested or devoid of the world beyond the five senses that they're rooted only in the physical, what they can see, smell, taste, hear, those kinds of things, and they deny anything beyond that. And for me, the truth, true freedom comes from finding like the pursuit of knowledge and healing and growth in both those realms, the physical as well as the the internal, the spiritual, psychological. And so the conscious resistance, as I call it, is the understanding, the recognition that the struggle for a more free world comes from both understanding the physical realm, that there are corporations and governments and people doing things in the physical realm that are not helping the planet and not helping the people and not conducive to freedom. And at the same time, there are also different idiosyncrasies and traumas and pains that each of us have in different ways based on our experience or just the human experience, that I believe without healing and facing those things, we will continue to cycle and create these various cycles of trauma that we experience on the human level and the individual level. And so that's kind of what I've called the conscious resistance. And then, as I said, I started to expand upon it in some of my books, calling it holistic activism or holistic anarchism, which is just kind of even more specifically the idea that when you're trying to change the world around you, that it's important to take a really holistic approach. And, that's kind of a buzzword, but it does have meaning. It comes from the philosophy of holism and studying whole systems rather than just individual parts, because it changes the way you understand a topic or a field of research by looking at it holistically. And so in our conversation, in terms of trying to change the world, make the world a better place, it's very easy to point your finger and say it's the government, it's the Monsantos, it's the Bill Gates, it's those people, right? And not point your fingers back at ourselves and say, well, I'm actually contributing to the system. I have my money in the bank. I'm working with the bank that's funding this pipeline on indigenous lands or whatever the thing may be, right? And so the holistic side comes in by asking individuals to look at your interpersonal relationships, the way you make your money, how you make your money, where you spend your money, where you get your food and how you source your food and what the cost of that is, the kind of job that you work, all these different areas. I mean, you can really expand and go as deep as you want, but that's, kind of something that I've been just building on the last couple of years and writing about in my books, the Conscious Resistance trilogy, which kind of collects a lot of those philosophies that I've been working on. But, generally speaking, that kind of encapsulate what I believe that. And my reason for having those beliefs is even more directly impacted by my own experience of dealing with self-harm and suicide attempts and depression and masking it through sex and drugs and alcohol and this and whatever else, and realizing that, like, if you had come to me with all these important topics that we're, dealing with today, when I was going through that stuff, I would have been open. Like I said, I didn't trust the government. I would have been like, wow, they're really doing this. I can't believe it. Or, that's really happening. But I was also just trying not to kill myself that day. I was trying to just make it through. I wasn't in a good place. And so I couldn't come help and fight the good fight. And so it helped me realize once I got through that and out of that until we really do address this healing, which I think is different. Not everybody's going to have the same sob story or same trauma. And that's the thing, is somebody's story might sound to them like, oh, you went through so much. My story is so much smaller, but it's still your story. It's still your trauma. It's still your journey and your healing. And I think that it's just extremely important for us to remain open to that. And especially, as I'll say this, as two men speaking, it's something, at least in my experience, and maybe you and some of the audience can relate, is often discouraged in circles of men to talk about healing, to talk about like whatever traumas and things that we might have gone through, the growth that needs to happen, right? And so I think it's even more important because there's something that happens when you're able to forgive, when you're able to, forgive yourself, forgive other people, and it empowers you. I mean, you move even more to, like you were saying earlier, like living your actual truth.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And, also, I think that there's a connection here. And, between the whole kind of holistic side of things and the spiritual side of things and freedom and liberty and, these kind of ideas. And actually, this is something that I discussed with Andrew when I did my podcast episode with him. And he basically said, like, you can't really, like, without freedom, like what are you living for, right? Like that is the kind of route to self-actualization. And I think that ultimately what we're all trying to do here, and especially in the kind of spiritual community and in that holistic community, is that you are that is all a route for some kind of self-actualization, right? Like they're interlinked concepts. And my belief is that, like, without freedom, you can't ever self-actualize. And for instance, perhaps when you were in prison, you noticed that there was no freedom to be had there. So then it could have almost been a bit of a catapult effect that when you kind of got out of prison, it was like, okay, I have the freedom now. What am I going to use it for? And you kind of have more of an inclination to say, okay, well, I now have the opportunity to self-actualize. It's very difficult to self-actualize in a prison cell. It's very difficult to, just to use that more broadly for the general population. It's very difficult to self-actualize when you're in a 9-to-5 working in an office, whatever it is. So I think that these two things are very linked, finding freedom and finding a way to self-actualize. And I think that everything that's happened since 2020, and I'm sure this happened before in history. I don't think, the world runs in cycles, right? And I'm sure that there has been times previously in history that people have kind of come to this same realization. But you have these big events and it kind of forces you into the spiritual realm. And then through that, you develop a real thirst for freedom. And it's almost like, I believe that basically we have a default kind of level of freedom, which we're always it's aiming to achieve. This is not aiming, but it's just the natural order of things, which is that we want to be free. And when we stray too far away from that, we kind of get pulled back. And I think that COVID has been that big almost correction in this path of freedom in the world, where we moved too far away from that and we needed something to bring it back. And it's not just COVID, like you said, you've got the whole Agenda 2030 stuff and, the whole direction of the world that the WEF and all these other organizations are trying to push things. They're trying to push things to a position where we have less freedom. But I think the more they try to push it, the more that it kind of forces people to become more in touch through that friction in their lives, to become more in touch with their spiritual selves. And that is going to kind of bring around a transformation in the world. And that has a kind of contagion effect in itself, because we then go, okay, now that I'm more spiritually connected, I become a kind of conduit for this in my life and the people around me and my family, my friends, etc. And then that kind of builds and has a domino effect, which is why I remain optimistic of where we're going in all this.
Yeah, I think that's really important, man, because it took me a couple of years. I mentioned Alex Jones earlier. I went through my brief period of kind of getting sucked into InfoWars and some of the stuff in the beginning. And it's the kind of thing that makes you feel like it's about to happen. Like, oh my God, like tomorrow they're about to take us out of our houses and take us away to FEMA camps. Like, it's so intense, right? Then you kind of get to a point, or ideally you get to a point where you're like, okay, I can relax. This is true. These things are happening, but it's not as intense as maybe some people are trying to sell me. Let me step back. But then, of course, like you said, with COVID, things did accelerate and it became this whole new awareness. But my point is that it took me a couple of years to really start to think about it on a deeper level. And ultimately, I believe whoever, you want to insert we named some names, Klaus Schwab, some of these types, maybe even the people behind them, whatever names you want to put there. The Henry Kissingers of the world, those types of people, the war criminals, I fully believe on a energetic, spiritual, whatever you want to say level, that there is a purpose being served. And it might be beyond our understanding. Like, for whatever reason, people like us, maybe we didn't drink enough fluoride, maybe we didn't watch enough TV. I don't know. But for whatever reason, we're here. We are playing the role that we're playing to bring these conversations, to bring this stuff to light. And at the same time, they are playing the role that they're playing. And, without them playing the role they're playing, we wouldn't be waking up. You know what I mean? Like, if there wasn't something for Alex Jones to make a documentary about, if there wasn't a Federal Reserve for Ron Paul to write a book about, then there wouldn't be a movement to build, to respond and to react and to say, is there a better way to do things? You know what I mean? So I feel like that's really kind of the catalyst of COVID in that way. And that's what I was saying earlier about it being just like, in some ways, a positive thing. If it helps us to find more of our own truth and what it is we want to be and what kind of lives we want to lead, then I think that, there's some positive element to it, and I think that there is that kind of yin and yang, positive and negative that we see, where they're playing their role, whether we get it or understand it or not, and we are playing the role that we feel inclined to play.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. Oh man, there's so many, I've got so many things on this list that I wanted to talk to you about. And I think rather than do them all an injustice and kind of try to rattle through them all, too quickly, maybe it's better to kind of split this up. I mean, obviously if you're keen for it, like, I'd be up for doing another conversation down the line, but,
sure.
For now, I'll just leave a few of them off, and maybe, we'll address them another time.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, let's just end on one final thing, because I know that you've only got 10, 15 minutes to go, which is, you mentioned about the conscious resistance, and I know that you've got freedom cells as well as another kind of thing you're working on, and I just want you to go into, first of all, kind of how the differences and similarities between those two things. Are they all kind of part of the same thing? And also just what it is that you're trying to achieve through your advocacy. Like, what is the world that you want to see us achieve in 2030?
Cool. Well, thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share my ideas and my work. I do appreciate it, man. And yeah, I'm definitely down to come back and have another dialogue down the line. So the Conscious Resistance, theconsciousresistance.com is the website, and it's short for the Conscious Resistance Network, which is, so when I started the activist group I mentioned before, when I started getting involved, it was called the Houston Freethinkers, and that was obviously based in Houston. It was a lot of people I was working with, And even though we were a decentralized group, just because I'm active and I'm a loudmouth, people started to say that I was the leader of the Houston Freethinkers. And if I would say something, they would sort of say that I was speaking for the group. And so as I started to get more interested in journalism, I would realize like I need to have a second and like somewhere else to speak my mind. That's not like Derrick Broze speaking for the Houston Freethinkers. And so that was kind of the original impetus. And I started this website just called The Conscious Resistance, just as a place I used to have an online radio show years ago, the same name. And it was a place to start just putting out my work, my interviews, my videos, reports and stuff like that. And then, as I mentioned, as I started to take it more serious, I kind of came up with this idea of making it a network. And so at different times over the years, we've had a range of content creators, people talking about politics, talking about crypto, talking about technology, yoga, spirituality. To me, I wanted the Conscious Resistance Network to be kind of a place that we could talk about any of these sort of topics. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I've been interested in things like UFOs and Bigfoot and spontaneous human combustion since I was a little kid. So I'm kind of open-minded, clearly, and in taking things like acid only helped me be more open-minded. So I wanted to have a place where I could do real journalism and talk about serious topics, but not feel like anything was necessarily, out of bounds. That if I wanted to do a video talking about UFOs, I could explore that topic. If I wanted to do something like a deep dive into crypto, I could do that, or some other journalistic thing, like you mentioned, the Finders, investigating child trafficking and stuff like that. So the Conscious Resistance is like my main journalistic hub. This is where people can find my books, my documentaries, my podcasts, interviews, all kinds of stuff. And then there's also the work of other contributors that have come and gone over the years. So that's like the main place for that. And then the Freedom Cell Network itself is another project of mine, but it is separate. That website is freedomcells.org, and that's CELLS, like the cells in your body. Each of those cells is beautiful and powerful on its own. It's unique. It's doing its own task, but it's also part of the larger organism, the larger whole, which is you, your entire body, your entire being. And that's sort of the goal of the Freedom Cell Network. I first learned about this concept from my buddy John Bush in Texas back in 2015, and he was talking about what he called the Central Texas Mutual Aid Society. And what if we started building these localized, decentralized groups, mutual support groups that could be there to grow food together, render aid in emergencies, weather emergencies, government emergencies, what have you, could get encrypted communication, could have forms of self-defense. And as these local groups grow, they could eventually start to form a network that could compete with the current system itself. And that was a really lofty idea back in 2015, and I was inspired by it. So I started running with it and started doing what became known as Freedom Cells. That's what we call them, groups of ideally 7 to 8 people focused on skill sharing, knowledge sharing. It's meant to be apolitical, solutions focused, just all about building outside of the system. And so I've been promoting it since that time, 2016, doing videos, talks, presentations, writing about it in my books. But it wasn't until March 2020, when COVID happened, that we saw this really rapid expansion, exponential growth of the network from like 1,500, 2,000 people on our current website till where we're at now, which is over 33,000 people. And we just on August 1st relaunched the site now, and we upgraded, made some new features, made it easier for people to find each other. The whole reason the site exists is to help people find people in their community. So you go on there, you create a free profile. What are your skills? What are your interests? What are your goals? Are you a permaculturist? Are you a gardener? Are you a builder? Are you ready to buy land? Are you looking to just meet in person or only want to talk online? You can put all these things on your profile, and people can go. You can go to the maps and you can search, like let's say you wanted to search Houston. Show me all the people in Houston who are ready to meet in line, who are ready to meet in person, who are interested in growing food. And then it'll show you the people who meet those qualifications. Or you can be more broad and say, just show me everybody that lives in my area within 10 miles, things like that, right? So it's meant to be a way for people to connect, to find each other. And it's been really beautiful to see that it's working. It's like there's not all the groups that call themselves Freedom Cells on Telegram or on our website are as active as others, but there are many people who understand the concept and who are now growing food together, homeschooling their kids together, de-Googling their phones. They're, just doing Linux workshops. I mean, there's so many different areas that we're seeing people focus on. So that is the main goal of that project, is to help people connect with each other. So many people have told me, as I mentioned earlier, over the years that they felt alone. They felt isolated. They thought they were crazy. And so this is a way for people who maybe haven't got plugged into their local community. And, because some people live in an area where there's 10 different activist groups, and there's always something to do, and it's easy to find people. Others live in a place that might be harder. They haven't connected with like minds yet. And using our website and our tools, people have, it's been really beautiful to see that it's actually working. And all we're doing is just facilitating the exchange, the connection. We're not taking any information from people. We're not charging anything like that. So yeah, that website is freedomcells.org. And the Freedom Cell Network is the organization, or the lack of organization, if you will, that is behind the Greater Reset. So, they're all kind of interrelated, but they're also kind of separate projects. But I encourage everybody to check out, my work at theconsciousresistance.com, check out freedomcells.org. And if you're interested in coming to an event like the Greater Reset that's focused on solutions, it's January 2023. You can come to the Texas event or come down to Mexico and, just get connected with more people, because and to wrap it up with the answer to your other question, like the reason I'm doing all this is because I think that my 6 nieces and nephews who are 12 and under, and especially the youngest ones who have just seen the last 2 years of people wearing masks and being shut down and locked down and all this stuff, that they deserve a better world. They deserve a world where they do still understand and maintain the concept of bodily autonomy. And the reality is that the people in the World Economic Forum and these different players, they do have advantages over us. They have trillions of dollars at their disposal. They have multinational corporations working with them. They have, these governments around the world. They're working night and day on this marketing campaign to transform the world in the vision they want. Now, I think that if we don't want to get swept up in that vision, because that's the dangerous thing is you can say, okay, that's great, Derrick. This sounds all nice and good, but I don't have time for that. That doesn't matter. It will still affect you. By sitting still, you're not resisting. By kind of ignoring, putting your head in the sand, you're not stopping what's coming. To me, the solution is to build a better world. And that better world is a world of freedom of choice, of freedom of speech, of bodily autonomy, of self-ownership, and of respecting that amongst each other. And that's to me is at the core of it. Those are the core values that I try to promote: self-ownership, the golden rule, the non-aggression principle, bodily autonomy, and then in line with indigenous ways of thinking, the 7th generation principle, thinking not only about the ways that the lives we live are impacting the people around us now, but how they're going to impact the people in the coming 7 generations and beyond. And so that's really how do I try to live my life. And I can't tell people what the world should look like. I know what I would like for my world. And this is why I'm in the process of buying land in Mexico, working with a small community to build the project that we call the Conscious Agora, using permaculture principles, building it around the sovereignty of the individual and mindfulness, and trying to create a model to show people that it is possible to live another way. And I just think that that's where we should be putting our energy and time into, building new systems and trying to see what is the 2030 we're going to look like. Because I don't know if any of us really know what we're headed towards. We just know what we don't want.
Love it, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and really appreciate all the work you're doing. So keep that up, and I will be in touch for round 2.
Hey, brother, appreciate it. Thank you so much, man. And it's been a great conversation. Look forward to the next one.